A few years back, I had an experience that there's no way to really logically explain. And I don't think it was just a dream or my imagination or a delusion, but I experienced something from two ends of my life, from the past and from the now. And I remember clearly when I was in Vietnam, it was in 1967, and I just had a really, really bad week in Vietnam, and several people were killed. And I tried to warn one guy not to fly on an air. In fact, I tried to warn the whole unit not to go flying on this one particular aircraft, and in spite of that, and in spite of me refusing to fly on it, it went out and crashed and killed everybody on board. And I remember how bad I felt because that guy that got killed, the door gunner, who was just a couple days in the unit and only that was his first flight. I remember feeling personally responsible that I couldn't save him. I knew something was going to happen, and I warned him, and I warned the company commander, I warned everybody, but it didn't change anything. And there were several other people that I tried to change their destiny. I knew things were going to get killed or wounded or whatever, and whatever I did, it didn't seem to affect any change. So I was sitting out there in the runway in the middle of the night. What happened was you flew all day long and you came back, and they parked the Huey helicopters on these pads, and you were all alone out there, and it was dark and there was no lights, and you had a little flashlight, and you're working on your helicopter, fixing it up for the next morning. And I'm out there about midnight, sitting on top of the helicopter by the blades, and feeling really bad. And I got a flashlight and a crook of my neck shining on something I'm working on, and which wasn't too smart because if there's snipers out there, that's the only thing they see is that light out there, and that's what they're going to shoot. But anyway, and all of a sudden, as I'm feeling really bad about not being able to help anybody or change their lives or affect change at all, um, I felt somebody looking at me, and I look up, and just a couple feet from me sat this old guy with a beard and looked just like I do now. It was me, but me of the future. And me of the future was trying to reassure me, my 21-year-old self, that, hey, you can't change the fates of others. It's not in your hands. It's their destiny. It's in God's hands. You can give warnings, but if nobody listens, it's not your responsibility. And so I had this big, huge conversation with myself from the future. I didn't know if I was going crazy or not. I just thought, well, this is kind of interesting and all. But I had this long conversation out there for about a half hour now. Maybe I was cracking up under the strain of battles. I don't know. But there I was in flesh and blood, talking to my flesh and blood self for when I envisioned what I'd look like in the future. And so that was a memory of what happened in Vietnam. And then a few years ago, I was tied up in the problems of friends and relatives and organizations, and I saw all these I envisioned all these problems coming to these people. Intuitively, I knew things were going to happen to a bunch of people, and it was getting to me because I wasn't able to affect change to stop these things for these people. This had to come from them, and they weren't listening. And I knew hard times and suffering and illness and death was coming to several people, and I was quite troubled. And I'm laying in bed one night, and I was sitting up in my bed, and I just was focusing all the love I had for these people. And next thing you know, it's like I'm in this darkness, and then the darkness kind of fades, and I find myself sitting on top of that helicopter back in 1967 in Vietnam. And I'm looking at my 21-year-old self. And I find myself giving this advice to this younger version of me. And I'm going, oh, yeah. And I talked to my younger self. I said, hey, we've been here before. We've had this conversation. And the younger me goes, yes. And I'm experiencing this from both the young and the old. It was really odd. And then the younger me told the older me, the now me, that I should follow my own advice from my own things that I've learned, that I can't change and control the outcome of fate for others. That was their destiny and it had to come from them. And that's what the younger me was telling me. So it was saying, just like I then couldn't change the fate of my fellow members of my combat unit, that same situation was available now. I couldn't change what was going to happen to these people. I could love them, I could pray for them, I could give them advice, but they were in control of their own destinies. And the younger me told me, relax, don't worry about it. It is what it is. And it was really odd because at that moment, the younger me and the old me were having a conversation. It was me having a conversation with myself from the past and the future. And I was bearing witness to this, and I'm going, wow, this is really, really, even for me, this was really out there. And then I got this feeling that everything will be all right. That, yes, this advice is what I needed to hear, and it'll all work out. And then all of a sudden I'm enveloped in darkness again. And then I feel myself sitting on my bed in a darkened room and realize that I'm back in the present now when this happened. And I knew that I got my answer, that you really can't control what happens to others. You think you can control. You can give advice, you can tell people things are going to happen, you can do all these things. But ultimately, the people have to connect their own dots. They have to make their own decisions. They have control. So I found myself with tears rolling down my cheeks. I was saddened by that news, but also gladdened that I understood. And I knew that I had to watch pain and suffering of others. And I could do what I could do, but I can unburden them. They had to go through these things in their lives. And that's very difficult for someone who has any intuition at all. When you know things are going to happen to others, and then you realize nobody's listening to you and nobody's going to change. And it was a huge lesson. But what happened that evening was real. Wasn't a dream state. It felt physical, real. I was physically sitting on the helicopter. When I was having this conversation with myself, I was back and forth between consciousness. I was the young man, I was the old guy. I was the young, I was the old. Back and forth. I could see myself in both directions. And I could think and feel how I felt then and now. So, was I crazy both times? Was it truly just a real deep, realistic dream? Was it delusional and craziness? Honestly, a part of me believes that I was there for myself, and I went back to have a consultation with my younger self to help me in the future. So it was me helping me in the past, and then me helping me in the future. I don't understand it, but I stand by what happened to me. The experience felt real.